somewhere close to where you're watching this, right now, someone may be waking up in a house with no one else in it capable of lifting them. Now imagine that's you. You are 93. The person beside you needs help simply sitting up before his back stiffens for the day. And the lifting itself, steadying an arm, bearing real weight will happen more times before breakfast. And most people lift anything all week. No nurse arrives at 7. No professional waits in the next room. Just your own 2 hands and a day of care that does not pause for how tired you already are. By most accounts, you should be exhausted in a way that breaks people. Research on spousal caregivers is fairly blunt about this. Caregivers over 65 face more than twice the burnout risk of younger caregivers, and one well-known study found that elderly spousal caregivers under significant strain had a mortality risk 63% higher than non-caregivers their age. The people who study this describe a slow erosion sleep that never fully catches up, a body that starts absorbing stress the way a sponge absorbs water until it simply cannot hold any more. You are, in every meaningful sense the outside world would recognize, living alone with the full weight of another person's daily needs on your shoulders. Exactly the situation that research says should wear a person down within a matter of months, not years. And yet, in the village where I live, this is simply Tuesday. It is Wednesday and Thursday and most days for years now. My husband, Kenji, is 94. 2 years ago, I told you about the day he fell in our garden and broke his wrist and how he was back on his feet within 11 days. What I did not know then, what none of us could have known, is that the fall was the beginning of something slower. His body has simply grown tired in ways that do not reverse steadier decline than crisis, the kind that shows up first as needing a hand to stand, then needing a hand to dress, then needing someone nearby simply because being alone had become unsafe. There is no dramatic name for what is happening to him. He is not sick, exactly. He is 94, and his body has begun asking for more help than it used to. I am the one who gives it. Most days, I am the only one who gives it. And I want to tell you honestly how a woman my age does this without the strain research says should be crushing me by now, and why I think the answer has less to do with me personally than it does with the specific patch of ground I happen to have been born on. My name is Sachiko Ihara. I am 93 years old. I was born in a small village in the hills of northern Okinawa, near a place called Ogimi, and I have lived within a few kilometers of that spot for nearly my entire life. Kenji and I built our house in 1958, and it still stands exactly where we built it, on the same land, though considerably more of my day now happens inside it than it once did. You may not have heard of Ogimi before, so let me tell you plainly what makes this place unusual, because I think it matters more to today's story than anything about me personally. Ogimi has just over 3,000 residents. Of those 3,000, 15 are past their 100th birthday. And more than 170 are in their 90s, a concentration of extreme old age that researchers have measured at roughly 30 centenarians per 100,000 residents, compared to about 20 in the entire United States. The village has, at various points, been described by researchers and by the World Health Organization as one of the longest living communities anywhere on the planet, and it has drawn scientists here for 50 years, ever since the Okinawa Centenarian study began cataloging exactly what people in villages like this one were doing differently. What outsiders often don't realize is that the wider region around us did not keep pace the way Ogimi did. Much of Okinawa saw its famous longevity advantage erode over the past several decades as younger generations adopted a more westernized diet after the war. Ogimi, tucked into the hills, further from the main roads and the fast food that arrived so quickly elsewhere on the island, kept more of the old patterns intact simply by virtue of being harder to reach. I don't think that isolation was ever a deliberate strategy. I think it was closer to an accident of geography that happened to preserve something everywhere else slowly let go of. Here is something I think is easy to miss in all that research, buried under the statistics about diet and genetics. Ogimi is not simply a village where individuals happen to live a long time. It is a village built, almost accidentally, around the assumption that old age arrives for nearly everyone, and that when it does, nobody should have to face its harder demands entirely by themselves. I did not understand how much that assumption was carrying me until Kenji needed the kind of help. That would, in most places I've heard described, mean hiring strangers, or moving him somewhere else entirely, or simply breaking the person doing the caring. I want to walk you through what actually holds me up, piece by piece, the way I've come to understand it myself over these past 2 years. The first piece is the one most outsiders misunderstand most badly. I am almost never actually alone in this house, even though no one else lives in it. My Moai, the circle of women I've met with nearly every week since 1988, has quietly reorganized itself around Kenji's needs without any of us ever formally discussing that we were doing it. Tsuko comes on Tuesday mornings now, specifically, and sits with Kenji for 2 hours so I can go to the market and the pharmacy without rushing, without watching the clock the way I would if he were alone. Another friend, Kazuko, has taken to bringing extra of whatever she cooks on Thursdays, enough for our house too, which she frames as simply enjoying cooking in large batches. Though we both know precisely what she's doing, neither of these women is paid. Neither considers it a favor worth mentioning. It is simply what a Moai does when one of its own needs more than tea and conversation for a while. Beyond the Moai, there is the wider fabric of the village itself, which I think a visitor would struggle to see clearly in a single afternoon, because none of it looks organized. The man who runs the small vegetable stand near our house began, without me asking, setting aside the softer, easier-to-chew produce for Kenji specifically, and mentioning it quietly when I come by, rather than making it something either of us has to discuss directly. Takashi, a district leader here whom researchers have written about for belonging to 2 separate Moai of his own, once told me that in Ogimi, growing old without a safety net is considered less a private misfortune than a kind of communal failure, something the village as a whole would feel responsible for, not just the family involved. There is also a rhythm to how the village simply notices things, which I have come to rely on more than I ever expected to. My neighbor's teenage grandson, who is not related to us in any way, is taken to walking past our house most evenings on his way home from school and calling out, a greeting through the open window, loudly enough that I know, without either of us saying so directly, that he is confirming someone in this house is upright and, well, he has never once been asked to do this. I suspect he does not think of it as anything at all, simply a habit, the way you might wave at a neighbor's dog. But I have come to understand that a village where teenagers absent-mindedly check on the elderly on their walk home is doing something most formal caregiving systems spend a great deal of money trying and often failing to replicate deliberately. Layered on top of all of this, formally, is Japan's long-term care insurance system, Kaigo Hoken, which I've described in more detail elsewhere, and which now sends a care worker to help train Kenji twice a week, a task that had become difficult and occasionally dangerous for me to manage, entirely on my own. That single formal service, arranged calmly through an assessment we completed years before we needed it, removes what would otherwise be one of the physically hardest parts of each week. None of these pieces on their own would be enough. Together, they mean that when people describe me as living alone, caring for Kenji by myself, they are describing something true only in the narrowest sense. I am the only one in this house most hours of most days. I am very rarely, in any way that matters, actually carrying this without help. The second piece is what has kept my own body capable of doing physically demanding work at 93, because none of the community support in the world would matter if I did not have the strength in my own hands and legs to lift, to steady, to carry. The traditional diet here, the one researchers have studied so closely, was never designed with caregiving in mind, but I've come to appreciate how well it happens to serve. It, sweet potato, not rice, still forms the base of most of what I eat, along with bitter melon, tofu, seaweed, and a local citrus called shikuwasa that I put into nearly everything. Tea, dressing, even Kenji's rice when he'll let me. Researchers have found shikuwasa contains remarkably high levels of a compound called nobiletin, several times what's found in most other citrus fruits, and early laboratory research has linked it to reduce inflammation, though I want to be honest that this research is still developing and I would not want you to think of any single fruit as medicine. I eat it because my grandmother did, and because it tastes bright and clean against the sweetness of the potato, not because I am chasing a molecule. What I think matters more than any single ingredient is something researchers call Hara-Hachibu eating, until you are roughly 80% full and stopping there deliberately meal after meal for an entire lifetime. I have practiced this without much thought since I was a young woman, and only recently have I understood why it might matter specifically for someone in my position now. A body that has spent 70 years never carrying excess weight, never straining under more than it needed to, arrives at 93 considerably more capable of lifting another adult than a body that has spent those same decades carrying more than it needed to. There is a practical dimension to this I had not fully appreciated until Kenji's needs changed. Lifting another person, even a slight one, places real strain on a caregiver's own back and knees. And I've watched neighbors my age develop injuries of their own from caring for a spouse, injuries that then leave two people needing help instead of one. My doctor, on a routine visit last year, told me plainly that the reason my own knees have held up as well as they have is almost certainly the combined effect of never having carried excess weight and having remained in continuous, if unremarkable, motion for decades gardening, walking, the small repeated labor of an ordinary life. She was not describing anything exotic. She was describing, in her own clinical language, more or less what my grandmother would have called simply staying useful. The third piece is harder to explain to people who haven't lived it, and I've come to think it may be the most important one of all. Purpose has not disappeared from my life the way I once feared it would when Kenji first began needing this much help. There is no word in our traditional dialect for retirement, and I used to think that concept applied mainly to work at a fishing, farming, to the trades people practice their whole lives without ever formally stopping. I did not expect it to apply to this, but I have come to understand caring for Kenji, exhausting as it sometimes is, as its own form of Ikigai, or reason to rise each morning that is every bit as real as the reason he once had to walk down to his boat before dawn to his boat before dawn. This is not a comfortable thing to admit, because it risks sounding as though I'm grateful for his decline, and I am not for one moment. But the specific daily task of caring for someone I have loved for 68 years has given my mornings a shape and a purpose that I think, honestly, protects me from something research consistently identifies as one of the most dangerous states for a person my age to fall into: waking up with nothing that genuinely need. I think about my friend Reiko, who lost her husband suddenly, without any period of decline beforehand, 6 years ago now. She has told me more than once, with a kind of honesty I admire, that the sudden absence of anyone needing her specifically each morning was harder in some ways than the grief itself, that grief she expected. But the particular emptiness of a day with no one waiting for tea at a certain hour caught her by surprise. I do not say this to suggest Kenji's decline is somehow a gift, because watching someone you love need more help each year is its own quiet grief running alongside everything else. But I have started to understand purpose and loss as less opposite than I once assumed. Some days, caring for him is the very thing keeping the loss from swallowing everything else whole. The fourth piece is simpler to describe and just as easy to overlook. The physical labor of caregiving itself, unglamorous as it is, functions as a kind of exercise nobody designed on purpose. I lift Kenji from his chair several times a day. I walk to the vegetable stand and back on foot most days rather than driving the short distance. I still tend a smaller version of the garden that once fed our whole family, kneeling and standing dozens of times before the morning heat sets in. None of it is exercise in the sense of a class or a program. All of it, accumulated across a day, keeps the specific strength I actually need: grip, legs, balance from fading the way it might if my days were spent sitting still. I want to be honest with you now, because I think romanticizing any of this would be its own kind of disservice, both to you and to people genuinely struggling with caregiving elsewhere, who deserve better than a version of my life with all the difficulty quietly edited out. This is hard. There are mornings I am tired in a way sleep does not fully repair, and afternoons when I sit down for a moment and do not want to stand back up. I have cried in my own kitchen more than once in the past 2 years, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the accumulated weight of small physical tasks, treated daily without pause, wears on a person regardless of the community around her. The research on spousal caregivers is honest about this too. That caregiver burden is real, measurable, and dangerous when it goes unsupported, and I do not think I am somehow exempt from that, simply because I happen to live in a village with good bones. What I think Ogimi actually gives me is not immunity from exhaustion. It is a floor beneath the exhaustion that keeps it from becoming collapse. Etsuko on Tuesdays, Hizuko's extra portions on Thursdays, the bath aid twice a week, so that even on the hardest days, I am never entirely without a hand somewhere nearby. even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. I want to say one more honest thing, because I think it matters more than the rest. There have been afternoons when I have resented the lifting, the routine, the particular way illness narrows a life down to a small set of repeated tasks, performed by one person again and again. I have felt guilty for that resentment nearly as often as I felt it, which I understand now is its own well-documented pattern among people caring for someone they love. I am telling you this not to darken an otherwise hopeful story, but because I think a woman describing her life as effortlessly sustained by community and purpose, with none of the resentment or exhaustion included, would not be telling you the truth. And I promised you the truth when I started this. The village holds me up. It does not make the weight disappear. Those are two different things, and I think both deserve to be said plainly. I have wondered, in the 2 years since Kenji began needing this much from me, why more places don't seem to have what this village has, almost by accident. I don't think anyone designed Ogimi's support system deliberately the way a government might design a program. I think it is simply what happens when a community stays small, stays put, and stays old together for long enough when the people who might otherwise have moved away for work never quite did. And the friendships formed at 17 are still the friendships doing the heavy lifting, literally at 93. In places where families move frequently, where children live states or oceans away from aging parents, where neighbors change every few years, that kind of decades-deep web simply hasn't had the time or the stillness to form through no fault of the individual families trying their best within it. I think there is also something about how a village this size handles aging that a larger city, even a kind and well-intentioned one, structurally cannot replicate. Everyone here has watched everyone else grow old. The teenager who calls through my window has watched his own grandparents decline, has likely already helped carry someone's groceries or steadied someone's arm on uneven ground before he was ever old enough to think of it as caregiving. Old age is not hidden away here behind institutional doors, encountered by most people only when it finally arrives in their own family. It is simply visible every day, walking to the vegetable stand, sitting at the tea shop, present in a way that seems to quietly train an entire community, generation after generation, in how to notice and respond to it long before they're asked to do so for someone they love. If you are caring for someone right now, largely on your own, without a village like mine around you, I don't have a simple answer for how to build one. Overnight, I don't think it's possible overnight, and I would be dishonest if I told you otherwise. But I can tell you what I would try to build piece by piece starting today. Find or accept whatever formal home care support exists where you live, even if it feels like admitting a kind of defeat to ask for it. Research on caregivers who receive even modest outside support shows meaningfully lower burden and anxiety than those who carry everything entirely alone. Ask one specific person, not a general offer of, let me know if you need anything, but a specific person, a specific day, to take over for even 2 hours a week, the way Atsuko does for me on Tuesdays. Hold on to or rebuild something that is unmistakably yours within the caregiving itself. Some piece of it that feels like purpose rather than only burden, because I believe that piece is doing more for me than I understood until I tried to name it. Yourself eat and move and rest with something like the same modest attention you give the person you're caring for, since a body that collapses helps no one. And forgive yourself in advance for the mornings you cannot get up with a smile. I have had many of them. I suspect I will have more. Kenji is awake now in the next room, and I should go to him. He likes his tea a particular way, and after 68 years, I am the only one who reliably remembers exactly how. Tell me, if you'd like, whether you are caring for someone right now, and what, if anything, functions as your own version of Atsuko's Tuesday mornings. I read what people share, and I know many of you are carrying more alone than I ever have to, and I think about that more than I probably say. This time, I would like to show you an ordinary Tuesday itself, start to finish, exactly as it happens in this house, not the tidy version, the real one, tea and all. Thank you for sitting with me this morning.